Welcome everybody to the launch event of the Breeding Bird Atlas season. I'm going to introduce our first kind of speaker and presenter, who is Gregor Beck. Gregor Beck here is a wildlife biologist and conservation professional with over 30 years in the field. As a birder and naturalist, he has directed conservation programs for Ontario Nature, Quebec Labrador Foundation, the Long Point Basin Land Trust, and Birds Canada. Gregor was a participant in the first Atlas. He was deeply involved in the second, and he's actively involved in the third Atlas, where he's serving again as chair of the Atlas Management Committee. He's also co-editor of the Atlas 2 book, if you've ever looked at that, and he is co-author of the NORAC Atlas Handbook, and he currently serves as Bird Canada's senior strategist. Welcome, Gregor Beck.
Thank you very much, Emily. How's the sound? That's great. I've had the privilege of serving in a number of roles at Birds Canada, Ontario Nature, and other organizations, and have been involved in a diversity of projects provincially and nationally. It's probably no secret, though, that among the programs I'm most deeply attached to are Breeding Bird Atlases and the Ontario Atlas in particular. So today I'm happy to be speaking in my role as the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas Management Committee Chair on behalf of the 5 project partners. I'm delighted to welcome everyone here today. Bienvenue à tous. The 5 groups that led the second Atlas so successfully are excited to be working together again as we advance fieldwork now in the second year for the project. So on behalf of Birds Canada, Environment and Climate Change Canada, the Canadian Wildlife Service, Ontario Field Ornithologists, the Ontario Ministry of Northern Development, Mines, Natural Resources and Forestry, and Ontario Nature, I welcome everyone to this kickoff weekend for year 2 of Atlas 3. I do recognize, of course, that some great atlasing has already been undertaken in year 2. It's fun to get started early in the season. At the start of today's event, I would like to offer this land acknowledgement in recognition of the Indigenous peoples and communities on whose land this project occurs. As a province-wide initiative, there will be different Indigenous communities, territories, and treaty lands where we live, work, or undertake atlasing, and we encourage atlasers to recognize and reflect upon this in your own regions. I'm speaking today from the North Shore of Lake Erie near Long Point, so I will speak personally and in that context. My home and our office are in the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Attawandaron, Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas, and I recognize also that I'm in the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit under Treaty 3, signed in 1792. Since the very beginning, Indigenous peoples have inhabited these lands, which are still home to diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Birds Canada and Atlas partners understand that Indigenous voices, knowledge, and ongoing work on the land are critical for wild birds to thrive in sustainable ecosystems. We support the needs, aspirations, and rights of Indigenous peoples to care for the land. We are committed to increasing the participation and collaboration of Indigenous communities in this third Atlas. We've reached out to the over 100 communities across Ontario to introduce the project and to welcome participation. We've formed an Indigenous engagement committee to help us do ever better. And we are continuing to reach out, striving to work with communities across the province. A number of new and expanded relationships are developing, and we're excited to build further on these over the course of the project. Birds and nature provide an opportunity for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities to come together. And we hope that this shared love provides an opportunity for us to illustrate our respect and the spirit of reconciliation across Ontario. Well, it's hard to believe a year has passed already since we launched the project. With all the challenges and stresses of COVID-19, I think many of us are feeling like we're in a bit of a time warp. In some ways, time flies, and in other ways, or at least to me, it seems to have stalled. Regardless of how you're feeling about all that, the one thing I keep hearing time and again is that connecting with nature and birds has been vital to our collective well-being. Birds have brought joy and sometimes excitement. They've encouraged us to get outside more. They've fostered camaraderie and sometimes too some friendly birding competition. Ever so importantly, birds, birding, and atlasing give purpose to our time outdoors by providing the opportunity to contribute to our understanding of changing bird populations and distribution. It's really great to see the changes from Atlas 1 to Atlas 2, Atlas 3. I'll probably advance the slide there. It's really great to know that observations of common ravens, for example, in my neck of the woods, illustrate how a species is colonizing the southernmost parts of the province, or how we're seeing the recovery of a charismatic mega bird like the bald eagle as it continues to recover. I think we have the slide there too of the common raven just coming through. And it's really exciting too. I think some of our most prized sightings are those of species at risk, and this really provides vital information to help us with the recovery of threatened and endangered wildlife. Of course, we're also starting to see some declines, and these will become apparent and more apparent with each successive year of the atlas, as we saw with the case of aerial insectivore birds with the second atlas. It was just such a pivotal moment when we started to see the declines of swifts and swallows and other aerial insectivores. In this case, if we look at another example, we can see gray partridge, which is kind of interesting because, while not a native species, we can see the steady decline of that already from the first to the second to the third atlas. Mike is going to share more highlights from year one momentarily, but all of our sightings collectively are vital to our understanding of the province's birds, from the largest to the smallest, and from the most common to the most rare. Truly, atlases are the epitome of large-scale volunteer science, and the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas remains one of the largest wildlife monitoring projects of its kind in North America. Atlases are huge undertakings, and there are dozens of people involved in their detailed planning and delivery. Hundreds of people are involved in support roles, and thousands of people like yourselves are actively involved as participants. I'd love to thank everyone, but we're not going to do that, obviously. But I do want to thank and draw special attention to the project staff, our partners, funders, in-kind supporters, committee members, and a stellar team of 6 regional coordinators, and about 100 people who serve on the Atlas's committees and working groups. Our funders are particularly important to help with the project Environment and Climate Change Canada, U.S. Fish and Wildlife's NIMCA program, the Hodgson Family Foundation, TD Friends of the Environment, with support for this weekend in particular, RBC Foundation, Canada Summer Jobs, Parks Canada, NRSI, Bailey Fund, Vortex, Newmont Wildlife Habitat Canada, and private individuals. We also have many in-kind supporters. Most importantly, though, I do want to thank and acknowledge you, the Atlasers, a collective team so far of 1,100 people from 2021. That number continues to grow, and we welcome and encourage new participants all the time. In terms of magnitude, the value of our collective contributions can't be understated. If we put a $20 per hour value on our field time, calculated just from the submitted checklist data, the value of this contribution last year was $720,000, 1 year just field work. So thank you so very much. Before passing the baton back, I do have one very special announcement to make relating to the Atlas of the Breeding Birds of Ontario book from the second Atlas. For those of us who've been deeply involved in multiple Atlas, this is particularly exciting. As you know, we published the results of the Atlas last time in book format, with 286 species accounts, 900 maps, 400 photos, and 728 pages. This was no small feat, especially when you consider that it all happened after the intensive 5 years of field work between 2001 and 2005. By all accounts, the book was highly successful, and it was well received by atlasers, general readers, and academics alike. Margaret Atwood and the late Graham Gibson called it invaluable and a must for everyone interested in birds, Ontario, and the natural world. And Professor Dan Mennell of the University of Windsor said the Atlas was a monumental achievement, setting a new standard for breeding bird atlases. Well, the print run of 4,500 copies is just about entirely sold out now. We've earmarked some of the remaining copies to be used in support of our goals for the third Atlas for Indigenous community engagement and youth outreach. And this is just a great way that the second Atlas is connecting us and supporting the third Atlas goals. There are now just a few dozen hard copies left available for purchase through Ontario Nature's website. So if you're interested in a hard copy, you may want to act quickly. Le livret est également disponible en français, but don't despair. A new chapter is launching for the Atlas II book, and we're really excited to announce that as of today, the entire Atlas II book is available for reading online in a slick new digital viewing format. You can find it on the Atlas website. Go to the archives page, you'll find it there, or follow the link from a news item coming up in the next newsletter for the Atlas. Regardless of whether you like to browse in hard copy online or a hybrid approach like myself, we hope you continue to enjoy the Atlas of Breeding Birds book. Please do check it out. Thank you so much for your interest, your support, and your attention. Merci beaucoup pour votre attention et pour votre aide dans le projet. Toutes nos ressources sont disponibles en français sur notre site web et plusieurs de nos coordinateurs régionaux parlent français. We know that there are some continuing challenges due to the pandemic, and we all need to work together to respect public health guidance and stay safe. But we got through year one together and we got a lot done. In fact, it's quite incredible about the successes we've accomplished. We're definitely excited about year two and beyond and look forward to hearing from all of you about your interesting and important atlasing observations, be they close to home or far afield. Many, many thanks for your continued participation. Un grand merci pour votre participation et miigwech. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gregor. And yeah, what a great way to start us off. But there's a lot more to come for today. So I'm just gonna explain a little bit about the structure of our online event for today and also into tomorrow, and then we'll get started with our very first session. So we've tried a little bit of a hybrid situation this year for the launch, where there are kind of 2 days worth of events, and some are happening online and some are happening in person. Today, for the rest of the afternoon, we'll be, going over through webinar format with a variety of experts, all of the ins and outs of the Atlas. And the schedule is really jam-packed with a lot of information for Atlasers. We're about to head into Mike Cadman will give us an introduction into Atlasing in general, as well as some year one highlights. After that, we will have an explanation of some of the safe dates and breeding codes. That's a technical aspect I think a lot of people are interested in, and it's quite complicated. And we'll also talk about significant species there. After that, there'll be a talk about special surveys and digital point counts, which is very exciting. And then we will finally, last but very much not least, talk about data entry and the Nature Counts website and app. So that's going to be taking us into the afternoon with a variety of different speakers. And then tomorrow, some of our regional coordinators all across the province are hosting in-person events. And if you go to the registration page where you registered for this webinar and you can see the full itinerary, you can see the contact information for a variety of your regional coordinators if you want to get in touch with someone in your area to see if there's a live event happening near you tomorrow. And that link is in the chat where you can see that right now. So for our digital webinar series for today, and I forgot to mention, I'm very sorry, tomorrow evening, after all of the in-person events have wrapped up, we'll be reconvening back online in digital format on Zoom again. And, we'll be having some final remarks and also having a lot of fun doing a bird trivia, which is fast becoming an Atlas launch kickoff tradition. And the last thing I'm going to say before I get into some ins and outs of Zoom and introducing our first speaker is that when you do go out in the field tomorrow, or if you can go out into the field tomorrow, we have a variety of challenges for you. And these challenges come with prizes. And I'm going to call on Kaylin Bumelis, who's the assistant coordinator of the Breeding Bird Atlas, to explain a little bit about those before I introduce our speaker for right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Emily. So we do have 3 challenges and chances for prizes this weekend. And so the first is folks who are submitting their OWL surveys. If you've submitted an OWL survey this month, you're going to be entered into the draw for a prize. Our second challenge is to go out into the field, whether it be with your regional coordinators in your regions or just get out into the field atlasing. If you tag us in a picture on social media, either of yourself or what you're out doing, tag us and include the hashtag of your region. Then you will also be entered in to win a prize. The third challenge is to confirm breeding evidence. So any confirmed breeding evidence that can include used nests for those folks who are in the north and maybe can't necessarily confirm breeding evidence just yet, or maybe you can. Then if you confirm breeding evidence between the 16th and I think tomorrow morning, then you will also be entered to win a prize. So lots of prizes going on this weekend, lots of challenges, and best of luck to everyone.
What are the prizes, Kayla, that people can win?
Yeah, the prizes are going to be Atlas swag and a Peterson field guide. There's also going to be a survey that's sent out after, just to get some feedback from you guys and figure out what you thought worked or what you thought potentially we could do better next year for year 3 kickoff. And the prize, you'll be entered in to win a prize, which is a Peterson field guide to nests, North American nests. If you fill out that survey as well. So lots of prize, Atlas swag, field guides. So yeah, make sure you visit the website that I just put in the chat and you can learn a little bit more about the challenges or just, refresh yourself.
Can't say enough good things about the Atlas swag. I have some right here that I'll be wearing tomorrow. So make sure that you do enter these challenges because the prizes are excellent. Okay, so let's get started with our first speaker. We're going to talk about an intro to atlasing and also some highlights. I'm about to introduce our speaker, but while I do that, I'll have him try to share his slides just as I introduce him, just so that he has some time to do that properly. And of course, the first speaker appropriately is Mike Cadman, who is the coordinator for this atlas. And if you've interacted much with the atlas to date, you may already know him, or if you've interacted with previous atlases. So much of Mike Cadman's professional life has been devoted to breeding bird atlases, specifically in Ontario. He coordinated Ontario's 2 previous atlas projects. The first of those took place between 1981 and 1985. The second one took place between 2001 and 2005, and he co-edited the resulting books as well. And as of course, he's doing it all over again by coordinating Atlas 3. He says that he is constantly amazed at how different it is this time around, which is kind of interesting. And maybe we'll hear a little bit about that in his talk. So thanks, Mike. Don't forget to, seems like you're already sharing perfectly. Take it away.
Great. Thanks very much, Emily. And thanks to Gregor for that great introduction to the overall weekend and the Atlas generally. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here today and talk to everybody about the start of year 2 of the Atlas. I can say I was out atlasing this morning, and my partner and I were out and found a new sighting for the square sandhill cranes in a marsh in my square. And just looking back at 40 years ago, it's sort of unbelievable that would be sandhill cranes nesting in a square, some average square in the Guelph area compared to 40 years ago when they were barely starting to appear anywhere in Southern Ontario. So that's sort of the essence of the Atlas and what it's all about. Okay. All right, just trying to change slides here.
Make sure to click on it, Mike. Oh, there you go.
Okay, that's jumped down about 12 slides. Let me try and go back. Okay, yeah, sorry guys. All right, there we go. All right, lovely. Okay, well, I'll just jump in right into the deep end of the day is going to get more and more involved. I'm going to provide sort of a general overview of atlasing here, just what atlasing is all about, how you go about collecting data. This session is really primarily intended for new people or those in need of a refresher. And later on, the sessions of the day will give more and more detail to help you get down into the weeds. So as you can see, really the Atlas is all about taking stock of our birds. And we want to map the distribution and relative abundance of every species that nests in the province, determine their population sizes and compare them to previous atlases. We want to nail down precise locations of breeding areas for significant species. We want to make sure that North gets covered as comprehensively as we can. And then of course, the most important thing is getting all that data into a database where it's available for researchers and conservationists. Okay, interesting. Slide changer is sort of intermittently working sometimes. Oh, boy. Okay, sorry, folks. Okay, so the Atlas is, as you may know, if you've taken part in year one, it's truly an all hands on deck, no holds barred, pull out all the stops, science-based inventory of the birds of the province. It's powered by our birding community, and it's really an extremely useful thing for a birder to be doing. It's a fantastic application of your data and your skills. And of course, at the same time, it's a really enjoyable, fun thing to do. Our working together as a team to pull this together is, to me, the most exciting aspect of the Atlas. Sorry, the slide changing is just not going well. Okay, lots of conservation applications for the data. I won't go into all of these, but it's very helpful, particularly for species at risk, determining which species should be listed, working out what their critical habitat is, what should be our population objectives for those species, what's the value of protected areas. We're working quite closely with Ontario Parks and Parks Canada to help assess how the parks protect the bird community in the province. Lots of other things that we can we'll touch on as we're going through the rest of this presentation. For the project to work, we divide the province up into regions. Region 16 here, Peterborough. Each one of these regions has regional coordinators. These are the folks for Temiskaming region, 47 regions all told right across the province. If you go onto the website, you can see the map of the regions. You can get the contact info for those folks. And these are really your key source of information on the project, your key contact to find out what's happening in your area, where your help is most needed, and how your particular skill set can be applied most usefully to the Atlas. The regions are divided into 10 by 10 kilometer squares, and our goal is to make sure that each one of these squares gets adequately covered. About 2,000 of these squares in southern Ontario. And maps like this are available on the website. You can download them. You can print off a paper copy, download them to your phone, use them in the field there. It's sort of a topographic map, gives you an idea of where the different habitats are in the square, and so of course helps you figure out how to spend your time, because your goal is to find basically every species that nests in that 100 kilometer square area, so 10 by 10 kilometers. I'll touch again on what some of the little symbols on the map mean a little bit later. So for one of those squares to be adequately covered, we're aiming for a minimum of 20 hours of data collection, and I'll talk more about what that's about, in this key period of May 24th to July the 10th in the south, and in the north from June 1st to July 10th. You can collect data any time of year for the Atlas. There's very few birds you can collect information on in the winter. But by this key period, late May through early July, almost everything is nesting. In addition to trying to find every species nesting in your square, there are optional surveys that you could do, and we're certainly encouraging people to do them, because regular atlasing doesn't always give us good information on some of these other groups like owls, nightjars, and marsh birds. And we have special protocols for those birds that are going to give us better data, that help us map their distribution and do comparisons to previous atlases. Sorry, it's taking us a little while to change. Okay. One of the new features of the Atlas is that not only, well, let me go back because here we go. In previous atlases, really just collected data on the basis of that 10 by 10 kilometer square, but with the advances in birding over recent years, you can now collect information specific to a track, and all of the information comes in on checklists, and so it gives us much more precise information as to where you were and then we can use that to get a better indication of where the birds are occurring in the square, but where they're occurring in relation to into different habitat types and to protected areas. So you can do a track like up at the top right along a road, put in a checklist of birds for that, and of course that much improves the information we have over that of the whole square. You can do a stationary point. I will talk more about point counts, or you could just do a track like at the bottom left through a conservation area or through a woodland that again allows you to link your list of birds that you found on the outing to that specific track, which makes it much more valuable for conservation and research purposes. A new feature that we've added for this atlas, the tracks are new, but we've gone beyond that to allow you to now map precisely the location of any bird that you see along the way. You could do it for every bird you see, but we don't really need you to do that. But we do need that information for significant species. So in our area, snipe is an unusual species, one that we want to know more about. So as well as providing a track, when you're on the website, you can go to the map and just click on it and provide information as to where precisely you saw the snipe. And I'll show in a little bit how you can do the same thing on the Atlas app. Sorry for the delay here. It seems to be okay. It's yeah, okay. So when you're out collecting data in the field, you're collecting a checklist, i.e. how many robins did I see, how many snipe did I see, but you're also collecting information on the breeding evidence found. And these are standard codes that are used around the globe to indicate the confidence that we have in that the bird is actually nesting in that particular occurrence. And so you can see here, there are lots of different categories of it. You'll learn them quickly once you spent a little bit of time in the field. And I'll explain a little bit more in detail what they're about. But basically, you're looking at how strong the indication is that the bird is nesting, working towards the idea of trying to confirm breeding in as many species as possible. I guess my internet must be running particularly slowly today. Okay, so if you see a gull, I was out this morning, lots of gulls hanging around the pond. Those birds aren't at their breeding site. There's no indication that they're nesting there. And so you can just list that bird as an X, which just basically means it's in there. You've seen it in the square in the breeding season, but there's no evidence that it's nesting at that location. If you then want to elevate the evidence that you have, you can find birds that are possibly breeding. So birds like these that are the top two, the yellowthroat and the pied-billed grebe, are in nesting habitat in the nesting season. So we would call those possible breeders. Slightly stronger evidence is like the bobolink or the white-throated sparrow in the breeding season, in the breeding habitat, but this time singing and obviously indicating that they're interested in finding a mate or establishing a territory in that location, would indicate possible breeding. I think what I might do, because it's taking so long and it seems to be faster when I've done a few, I'll pop through a few squares and then come back, which might make it faster when the time comes. Okay, so once you've got possible breeding, or you might be able to jump right to probable breeding for species. So if you go back and that yellowthroat is in the same location a week later, the white-throated sparrow is in the same spot singing, those birds are indicating they've established a territory at that location, and you can record those as probable breeders. If you see a display, in the case of the waxwings at the bottom, sharing food in the breeding season, in their breeding habitat, you could consider those birds to be probable breeders. And a pair of wood ducks like this in a wooded swamp in the breeding season, you would consider those probable breeders. And then lots of ways of confirming breeding. Obviously, a nest with eggs like that for the wood thrush and the cowbird would confirm both of those species. But fledged young in the case of the pied-billed grebe or the loon sitting on a nest in the breeding season, a robin feeding young, or one of the easiest ways to confirm breeding is like the great crested flycatcher at the top right. A bird carrying food for young is also an indication of confirmed breeding, as is things like distraction display from a killdeer. So there's lots of ways to submit data to the project, 3 main ways. One is the Atlas app, and we'll certainly encourage everybody to use that. The Atlas app's called Nature Counts, and there'll be more information on that later today. You can collect information in a notebook and then go back and enter it on the website, or you can enter data in eBird. Just basically do what you would for eBird, do an eBird checklist, making sure that you stay within the same square, record breeding evidence for all the species that are indicating breeding evidence, submit that to eBird, and then copy that data over to the Atlas. And you'll learn more about that later today. So if you open up the app, if you look at the right side of the screen here is what you'll get, and you can enter, in this case, the fact that we saw 4 Canada geese. The fledged young was the highest breeding evidence we found. So you put the number in for the number of the birds, say that 1 American coot. You then tap on breeding evidence. It opens up the screen at the bottom left there that allows you to pick which of the breeding evidences you want for that record, and then just go on to the next one. Whoops, okay. All right, so when we compile all the breeding evidence from all the squares in Southern Ontario and all the squares in the north, we can start to put together the maps that show the distribution of each of the species, and the darker the shade there, the stronger the evidence of breeding. The yellow dots also indicate that the bird nested in that square in Atlas 2, but didn't nest in that square in Atlas 1. So that sort of shows an expansion of the range of the yellow rump warbler between the 2 atlases down into southwestern Ontario. Okay, a new feature, I mentioned about pinpointing locations for any species. In this case, I found a bald eagle. I tapped in, I've seen WAN AE, means I saw the adult entering a nest. And now I want to provide information on where that is. If I tap on the bald eagle, it opens up this detail and locations tabs. And when I click on the location, it opens up a map for me. This one, I guess, was taken in the winter because there's ice around. But then I can just simply tap on the screen, put in an indication of how many birds I saw. And actually, this is slightly out of date now because I can actually add the breeding evidence for that particular record right on this screen. So obviously, this is just wonderful information for conservation purposes, and we're really going to be encouraging people this year to be collecting more data that way. Point counts, we want to collect information on the relative abundance of birds. So we do that with these primarily with roadside point counts. You see those little pluses with numbers next to them all over the map. Those are randomly located on roadsides throughout the square. There's 40 of them per square if there's enough roads in the square. And the goal of the atlaser is to visit at least 20 of those on-road locations and then 5 off-road locations. And the circled part here indicates the off-road locations that we'd like you to go to. And it's really just a listing of habitats. So we want to put 4 off-road point counts in broadleaf forest and 1 in mixed forest in this square, because those habitats aren't well enough represented on the roadsides. So a point count basically consists of standing still in one point for 5 minutes and recording all the birds that you see and hear in that 5-minute period. It's sort of the world's simplest point count, the world's simplest survey method, but it's very effective in terms of getting an index of the abundance of the birds at that locations, and that information can be modeled so that we can look at how distributions of abundance change across the province. So you can do point counts on the app. So there's simply 2 time bands. You just indicate whether you heard or saw the bird in the first 3 minutes or in the second 2 minutes, the 4th and 5th minutes of each point count. To do a point count, a traditional point count like this, you really need to know your birds well by song. So if you're a new birder, you're not going to be able to do these point counts, but we have another method that you can use. You can also do these if you don't want to use the app, just use your notebook, indicate basically the same information that you do with the app, which time period you found the birds in. You can indicate a breeding evidence. If you find it for any higher breeding evidence for those species, you can indicate it and submit that information on the website. If you're not great at identifying birds by song, then you can use Zoom recorders. We've provided these to each of the regional coordinators. There's only a couple at the moment in each region, but you can do all your point counts in 1 day or 2 days if you set your mind to it. So we're hoping that these will get shared around among atlasers, and you go out into the field, and there'll be more details on exactly how to do it later, but you stand for 5 minutes in a location, record all the birds. That information goes into something called wild tracks. And Kaylin's going to be describing a bit more about that later. And experts interpret those recordings, provide the data into the system, and we put it into the map along with the rest of the point count information. And then we end up with maps like this that contour the relative abundance of birds. So you can see in the case of the yellow-rumped warbler here, peaks of population abundance in and around Algonquin Park. But if you look up at the top in the northwestern part of the province, a huge concentration of yellow-rumped warblers in there compared to the rest of the province. So this is all brand new information. None of this was known before the atlas came along. So it's really exciting to be thinking we can actually reproduce this information now and compare this back to Atlas 2. Our coverage goals are to cover every square in Southern Ontario, so 2,000 squares in the dark green area there. We want to cover about 5% of the squares in the mid-green area and about 2% of those in the remote north. And believe me, it's going to be very challenging to get all of this done. I should mention, though, as well as having volunteers out in the field like these 3 folks collecting information, we also are using ARUs, autonomous recording units, especially in the north. We're working closely with the Wildlife Service and the parks people and people from natural resources and other folks working in the north to put out these devices. You can set them to record for long periods of time. Mostly we put them out in the spring, pick them up in the fall, and then go back and select standardized periods that we want to listen to and interpret that information. And I can tell you, it's just opening up vast new areas of information about the birds, particularly of places like the Hudson Bay lowlands. I think we're going to encourage some of the folks involved in that work to come to some of our future, say, SPATIALLY events and tell us more about what the results we're finding from this work in the far north. It's quite fascinating. Sorry, still lagging here. Okay, and then I mentioned the far north. We didn't go into the far north in year 1 because almost every trip in the far north involves some sort of association or visiting of Indigenous communities. And with COVID, we wanted to avoid that completely. We're still, unfortunately, having to take that approach for the year 2 of the Atlas. And so we're going into the north this time, but we're finding routes that avoid the requirement that we visit northern communities. So this is, we actually have 5 trips that are planned this year covering 1 or 2 blocks each in the far north. And all our canoe trips, all are coming together. We're sort of organizing them as we go right now. And if you are interested in doing any of these trips, there's still opportunities. If you provide that information to us on the website in the next couple of weeks, there may be an opportunity for 1 or more 2 trips if we can find skilled birders who want to do these trips. We have lots of canoeists line up who want to do them, but we need more birders who are interested in doing those trips. And I can tell you, they're fantastic adventures. Sorry, slow. Okay, here we go. So yes, here's just pictures about people out in the field. You can see some of the canoe trips there up in the far north, folks standing on the tundra, scoping around. All the different ways of getting out. Really, I noticed biking there. Really encourage you to get out on your bike and do your atlasing. It's a wonderful way of being able to hear all the birds as you're going and moving silently through the landscape. Very effective. But anyway, the thing is now with COVID largely behind us, we can certainly do more group atlasing than we were able to in Atlas 1. And that's going to open up a whole new element to the project that is really one of the strong points of it. It's great to get out with your friends and colleagues and work together to cover squares and make sure that your region gets well covered, and then help out in other places around the province as well. Yeah, boy, just some great shots. That shot of the person sitting on the sand, I think that might be Caribou Island up in the middle of Lake Superior. Wonderful spot that everybody wants to get to. We'll be certainly sending people out there this time. And so there's two types of atlases, really. There's the primary atlaser, the person who takes ultimate responsibility for ensuring that that square is adequately covered. If you're not assigned a square, certainly there's a lot that you can do across the atlas. The primary atlases are there literally to make sure that the square is adequately covered. You are free to go and collect data anywhere in the province in any square. So just because somebody else calls it their square, it doesn't mean you can't go in there and collect data. So if you're a freelancer, you don't have an assigned square, you should be thinking about where you can help out. Talk to your regional coordinator about where your help could be most useful. Are there particular squares where efforts needed? Are there parts of the region? Are there groups of birds that need looking for? Could you do point counts to help out? There's lots of different ways to contribute that way. And the things like special surveys are ideally suited for newer birders who want to get out and make a significant contribution to the project. And just to mention that the square summary sheets available on the website summarize all the data for the region. So which species have been reported in the region, and then which species were reported in that square last time. So you can compare, you can see what was done last time, see the obvious gaps, so you can figure out which species you ought to be looking for to help ensure that we find all the species in each square. And just an extra plug for the significant species on the app and on the data forms, there's a little indication next to each of the species that we want more information on. And we really want to encourage you, if you get one of these birds, to provide the additional information that's on there. You can see the various categories here. And I should emphasize in particular, we want that location information this year with the new ability to be able to map those on the app. So folks, we've done it twice already. We're going to do it again, and hopefully we can do it this time even better. A new thing has just come up. The atlases that are underway in the US, Maine, Maryland, New York, and Carolina have challenged us to an atlas contest on June 24th to 26th. And I'm just excited about this. Ontario has a great history of rising to challenges like this. So would really just put this on your calendar and be thinking about how you contribute to the atlas, particularly on those days. And there'll be lots of challenges involved, there'll be prizes involved, and then we're going to have a get together afterwards and compare that with the folks from the different states and provinces. So quite an exciting event. Just looking forward to that one. Okay, so very quickly, just run over a few results, and so you can see how we're doing on Atlas 3 and compared to Atlas 2. So basically in the first year, as Gregor said, almost exactly the same number of atlasers in the two atlases. We had fewer species in Atlas 3 because we weren't covering the far north. We got around the same number of squares, but because we're collecting data by checklists as opposed to just on the basis of the whole square, we got about 4 times as much data. And then point counts, we got off to a great start, almost about 10,000. And I should say we got another 1,000 done by Zoom that aren't shown on here, indicating we're doing well on the point counts. And our total hours, a great involvement, especially considering COVID last year, 36,000 hours in total, 22,000 hours in that core period. So very comparable to Atlas 2. Just a quick map to see where all the data went in. The darker the square there, the more effort went into it. And you can see, reasonably well covered in and around the more populated areas. But anything that's not dark brown on there needs to get a lot of attention from this point on, and even a lot of the dark brown ones still need to be need more coverage to ensure we get the full suite of species reported. Point counts, we did end up getting about 20% of the target squares south of the far north, that is, done in the first year, which is great. As you can see here, we got data in more than 20% of the squares, but of course only partial coverage in a lot of squares. The digital point counts were done fairly widely, over 800 point counts done digitally. And I just wanted to show you some quick results from that. We had about 849 recordings done, reported 142 species. The average number of birds on a point count was around 11. But up to 23 on one station. You see that at the top right there, you can see which were the most abundant birds on those recorded point counts, which are pretty characteristic of the landscape, because most of these were actually done in central and northern Ontario. But interesting species do show up. You can see at the bottom left, I just extracted a few of them. But sedge-wren, cerulean warbler, upland sandpiper, these birds all showed up on those recorded point counts. So fantastic data from there, as did an Indian peacock on one of our on one of the point counts. So interesting to see how that looks on the Atlas in the Atlas publication. Okay, I just wanted to zip through a few maps. I think Gregor showed you some maps from Atlas. Comparisons of Atlas 1, Atlas 2, and the first year of Atlas 3. So I'm just going to zip through some of these because these slides have taken a bit of time. But anyway, so here's Atlas 1 for the common nighthawk. This is one of the biggest declines that we found. That's Atlas 2 for the nighthawk. So despite greater effort, far fewer squares did we find the bird in. And after the first year of the Atlas, indications that the decline in the south has continued. For Western Meadowlark, 40 years ago, back in the 80s, fairly widely distributed in southwestern Ontario. Atlas 2, they were getting pretty thin on the ground. Atlas 3, they're just about gone. And that's characteristic of other birds like, say, Henslow's sparrow, and there are other grassland birds that are following that trajectory. Trumpeter swan in Atlas 1, there weren't any. Atlas 2, quite a few records from reintroduction programs in Southern Ontario and in Minnesota. And then Atlas 3 already, after only 1 year, just obviously an explosion of trumpeter swans, as you obviously know if you spend any time in the field. Red-bellied woodpeckers, just coming into the province in Atlas 1 back in the 1980s. Early 2000s, they've established themselves right throughout the Carolinian and right across Lake Ontario. And you can see they're pushing up now up onto the southern edge of the shield in just the first year of Atlas 3. Bald eagle, I think Gregor mentioned it, but very, very few. Seeing a bald eagle was a huge thing 40 years ago. Second Atlas, a great expansion, not only along Lake Erie, but right up across the shield and Manitoulin Island and such. And then already in Atlas 3, after 1 year, a huge change. And I should say, I was just out at Guelph Lake last night, and nestlings in the bald eagle nest on Guelph Lake, first time they've ever nested successfully on Guelph Lake, so very exciting. So thank you to everybody for all your work in 2021. If you're new to the project, really looking forward to working together with you in 22 and beyond. If you do have any questions or comments, this will come up often, but there's the email address there. And yeah, we are on social media. If you haven't yet found us there on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Okay, so I don't know if we've got any time with my slides going so slowly for any questions.
We've got a little bit of time, Mike. We can cover a few.
Okay.
Yeah, so the very first question, some of these will be covered again, I think, by some other sessions, but maybe people aren't going to be able to get to those. So we'll get through as many as we can. First question is, with bird flu going around and being as it is at the moment, do you have any idea how that will impact the atlas or the results, etc.?
No, I don't have any idea how it will affect the atlas results. I should say we are going to send a note out in our next newsletter encouraging you, if you do find any birds that look to be diseased, to report them. We don't want anybody handling them, but to report those birds, and the information will be provided on how you can do that. Yeah, it's likely they'll have some effects. We certainly found with West Nile, when it came in, it had quite a big effect. And this particular brand of bird flu does seem to be quite serious in relation to previous ones. But it's very hard to predict based on the sort of early days of this, what kind of things might come about. So none of it's obviously good news, but it may be even possible to do comparisons over the course inside the atlas to actually look at how bird flu does affect the number of birds that are being reported, or if it does affect the number of birds that are being reported. It'll be interesting to see.
Okay, so stay tuned. It really is the answer. Very interesting, though. Someone else asked, this is about the app. If they're thinking about re-downloading the app, have there been any recent changes to it?
Yeah, the app has gone through lots of development. Though we did have some issues in the first year, particularly with iPhone users. That issue is sort of inherent to the mapping software. It's not something we can actually resolve entirely, but a lot of steps have been made to improve that. And I haven't heard the latest, but as to how it's going. But my understanding is that overall it's working well for everybody this time around.
Yeah, I have an iPhone, and I did some atlasing even just yesterday to see how the app was going, and it is vastly improved. So if you are an iPhone user especially, I would update the app and try it out. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at the moment, so that's good. Here's a very technical question, Mike. I don't know if you're ready for this to follow along, and it's a little bit about just the details and logistics of point counting, and how to count in those two main time periods. So Suhei says, for instance, if you have two robins singing in the first 1 to 3 minutes, and then the same two robins singing in the second time period, do you enter those two in the two time periods or just in the first one? Just a question about that.
Right.
We'll start with that. There's this part 2, but let's start with that question.
All right. So part 1, yes, yes, you don't. you just record the birds in the first time period in which you hear them. So if you have the same two robins singing away in the second time period, in the 4th and 5th minute, you don't record those again. It's to try and make it life simple for you. You really just have to indicate that which birds you've added in the second time period.
Exactly. So the second part here, let's see if I can follow along. Okay, new scenario. What if 2 are singing, in the first time period and then 1 during the second, but you know that 1 that started singing during the second is a third bird. So in that case, you would add that. You would have 2 in the first period and a third in the second period. Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay. So there we go. Sue, hope that helped. It does get a little technical, but, not insurmountable.
Yeah, I think once you've done a few, and especially if you can work with someone and work through a couple, you'll see it's pretty straightforward.
Absolutely. This is an interesting one also about point counts. So somebody says that they've, pre-scouted the point count locations just to kind of see where they are and what they look like. And they've identified some that, they're deemed to be the on-road point counts, but in fact, they're on very old kind of non-maintained trails and roads over some pretty demanding terrain. And I guess it's not really possible to drive between them. So they say, it's not possible for them to travel quickly enough between these point counts on foot and collect the data. It's not kind of a reasonable thing. And they say they also have breeding bird survey commitments too. Do you have any recommendations for, if some of your point counts are kind of difficult or tricky to get to in that way?
Yeah, that essentially, that's why redundancy was built into the system. We put 40 points on roads and asked you to do at least 20. So if you can do number 1 to 20, if you can access all of them, then great. If some of them have that situation where there's a road closed, or as you say, the old logging road has grown over now and you can't do it, then just move on to, instead of doing point 12, you would do point 21.
Makes a lot of sense. There are a couple more, but just in the interest of time, it being 2, I think we might leave it there, because a lot of the other questions that are asked, if we didn't get to your question, they will be covered in some of the coming sessions as well, which kind of deal with these issues, you know, specifically with the data submission and the app and things like that, which are going to be gone over in a lot more detail. So with that, stay tuned, everybody. Thank you to Mike Cadman.